हेलो।
नो नो मैम।
अच्छा अच्छा, एक मिनट यार, फिर देख लेंगे ये दिस वन।
Yes ma'am, it is. Yes, it is there ma'am.
ओके ओके।
We will start ma'am. A very good afternoon to all of you. I am Dr. Kiranjeet Kaur. I am a project coordinator in Department of Community Medicine and School of Public Health, and I welcome you all to this webinar series. I will be the host for this afternoon, and now I would like to invite Dr. Neena Singla to please introduce the faculty and to moderate the sessions.
Good afternoon. Wish you all a very pleasant afternoon today. And today we are here to, we've already done 2 webinar series in the last year. So this year we have started another webinar series for healthcare professionals. This is basically on updated management protocols of COVID-19 and current COVID-19 vaccines, current status of COVID-19 vaccines. So we have a panel of experts here today, and I'll be shortly introducing them to you. Kiranjeet, can you just show the next? We have Dr. Vikas Suri here with us. He is an additional professor in the Department of Internal Medicine, and he'll be speaking on WHO guidelines and national protocols for management of COVID-19. He is an expert in internal medicine, and this is his specialty. Then we have Dr. Bharti Joshi. She is an associate professor in Department of OBGYN and also the nodal officer for COVID-19 management in pregnancy. She'll be giving us a talk on the updated guidelines of management of pregnancy in the current scenario. Then we have Dr. Madhu Gupta, who's a professor in the Department of Community Medicine and School of Public Health, PGI Chandigarh. She will be giving her talk on current status of COVID-19 vaccines. As we all know that COVID-19 is taking a great toll on everybody and all over the world. So the management guidelines have changed accordingly, according to the way the virus is mutating. The same way the guidelines and the protocols for management have also changed. So we thought that it is a high time that we had some updates on this. Now I'll like to welcome Dr. Kirti Iyengar and her team from UNFPA who are funding this project. And I'd like to request Dr. Kirti to give the welcome address to everybody. Dr. Kirti, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Neena. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Kirti Iyengar, National Program Officer, UNFPA. I would like to thank each of you for joining this webinar during these very difficult circumstances. And on behalf of PGI, UNFPA, and REC Foundation, I would like to welcome all of you. As Dr. Neena also mentioned that we felt the need to hold this webinar because the pandemic has been emerging day to day, and there is new research about the virus every week. And due to the new understanding of the disease and the new research, the management protocols are also changing. What we had last year in March and what we have now in May, they are very different. Due to the new understanding, we felt at the same time that how the disease has been changing, but several doctors are not fully aware of what is the most latest management protocol. Because WHO has also issued new guidelines at the same time, Ministry of Health, AIMS, PGI, they have all issued their own management protocols. So it would be good if providers are aware of the current protocols so that we can, we can provide the best possible care to the patients and we can prevent complications, the need for hospitalization and deaths. This webinar has been arranged to update everyone on these 3 important topics. One is what are the WHO guidelines and national protocols for the management of COVID-19? What are the guidelines for management of COVID during pregnancy, and what is the update on COVID vaccine? So we sincerely hope that this webinar will be helpful to all of you to tackle the disease better, and we can help to save some unnecessary morbidity and mortality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kirti. Now I would like to invite Dr. Vikas for his talk. Dr. Vikas, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. not allowing me to.
Can you try now, sir?
But it's going up to the. Say advanced. Should I try the same, because it says slides at virtual background, and
okay, sir, that'll be okay, sir, if it is.
So can I start?
Yes, sir.
I think so. Let the slides roll load. Well, thank you, ma'am, for giving me an opportunity to speak here. It's tough times for everybody, and morning WhatsApps are sometimes very distressing nowadays. I think so. We are nearly back to square one, what we were about a year back. But I think so, as with teamwork, we're going to overcome this, whatever we're going through. So the management has changed and has not changed. Many drugs which were at one time at the front of the management of COVID have now, with new data coming every day, have been pushed to the wall. And a very cheap drug like steroids, which we have never used in viral infections, has been the foremost and it stood against all the odds till now as being the foremost in the management of COVID-19. So before I go to the national protocols, the WHO protocols, which are exactly, if you think in one go, this is steroid only hypoxia, rest is all you can use, you may use, or you do not use. So I thought I'll give you a brief outline of what is happening in the last 1 year in COVID-19. This is the data from the Ministry of Health website as of today morning. These are the number of active cases. Yes, deaths are increasing, and it is even projected that we may have the surge is going to continue for the next 15-20 days, and expected to end the plateau around the mid of May, and then probably there's some reports of coming of the third wave also. This is the state-wise data. Chandigarh is not behind. Every day we have close to we have not touched 1,000 cases per day, but if we see the Tri-City, which includes 3 cities of Panchkula, Mohali, and Chandigarh, then we're touching about 2,500 cases per day. So this is one old slide. So I thought I'll go to these 8 or 9 points. What has changed over the last a short of my presentation? What has changed over the last 1 year? The classical symptoms of COVID remain fever, cough, and shortness of breath. And as we all know, it may appear up to 2 days, up to 14 days after that. The newer symptoms, every day, NIH, we have said that we have seen that that headache, skin rashes, loss of smell and taste have been reported, and every day one new symptom has been reported as the data comes. The transmission, it has been categorically said that it is a droplet infection, but recent data came from the Lancet publications that airborne transmission also may occur with COVID-19. Nobody knows whether it occurs, whether it does occur. But yes, we have started taking some precautions for even keeping this in mind. Diagnosis, we are all aware that the gold standard still remains the RT-PCR, and we started testing way back in the March of 2020, and it is advisable everybody to take precautions while taking a sample. As you all know, we have to, the first screen gene is the E gene, and then the RDRP gene is the confirmatory assay. There's an RDT test for rapid diagnosis of COVID, and there's serological tests which are basically for epidemiological purposes, because a lot of antibodies are there in the antibody tests are there in the market. Their value in clinical practice is not. I don't believe in this test because never know how that lab is standardized, what type of antibody is there, whether it's a neutralizing antibody or whether it's a natural antibody. And this antibody wanes over time and gives you false sense of security that you are protected against COVID-19. And there have been case reports or even multiple cases in which the antibodies levels are quite high, but still you had the COVID infection. So should I test all patients? Well, before we go, these are the definitions of a contact. These are definitions of the various things I'll be using in my presentation. What is SARI? What is ILI? The SARI according to WHO is any acute respiratory infection with a fever more than 38 and the cough onset within 10 days and requiring hospitalization. The ICMR has had for months together contributed testing strategy, which was released somewhere in 4th of March 2020, in which they had said that if the RDT is positive and the patient is symptomatic, you can consider it symptomatic. And then they had some caveats about patient testing a asymptomatic patient. Recently, dated 4th May, they changed their guidelines and they said that RT-PCR must not be repeated any patient who has tested positive once, either by RT-PCR or RDT. There is no need for RT-PCR testing healthy individuals undertaking interstate domestic travels, which was one of the main categories in the initial one. All asymptomatic individuals must follow the COVID appropriate behavior. And they had come out with certain guidelines for setting up laboratories they had encouraged the use of mobile testing labs for the RDT testing. Recently, ICMR emphasized the need for a rapid antigen, the RAT test for early diagnosis, because a lot of time the RT-PCR is a lot of time consuming, and in cities where the load is quite high, the turnaround was somewhere between 24 to 48 hours, leading to a lot of intermixing and delay in initiation of treatment. Preventive measures, we all know the PPE kits. These are the constituents of PPE kit. And it's more important rather than to wearing a that to have the PPE kit, it's more important that you should be wearing the PPE kit in a proper manner. And these are the various forms of masks, a type of mask people have worn over the years. And I see my residents wearing the mask with their, most likely with their, around the chin. So it's the important part that these are the various steps how to wear a mask, and we should always not let the mask hang from the neck. Ideally, the mask should be changed 6 hours. But as a protocol in our hospital, we are given N95 masks, especially frontline workers, and we change it every day. Equally important is removal of the mask. We should always use the down string first and then take off the mask. Disposal of masks, whether you're in a hospital, community, at home, is equally important. And there are several videos on the net how to wear and how to take off the mask. I have a video, I can mail it to the organizers and they can be distributed. Again, it's the PPE kit. Again, it's more important that the hand hygiene maintained. The PPE kit, the N95 is generally recommended wherever the aerosol generation procedures are there. And even now data is coming that even double masking is about 85% protected as compared to the 95% protection with a single N95 mask. So as with mask, it is the correct way how to don, that is put on the PPE, and doff, that is how to take off the PPE. These are various ways how to don and doff. I have a video of the various donning and doffing ways. I can again mail it to you. This can be distributed among the values. So I'm just revising what is happening, reiterating what has to be done, and something new which has happened in the testing strategies, the diagnosis, and the various forms. So coming to the main part, that is how do I treat? If you ask me one thing, it is steroids, but I will try to make it a little more simple and try to go through the data about various definition. But before I go ahead, the government of India defines the COVID into three categories: that is uncomplicated illness or influenza-like illness. Then they have some mild pneumonia. There's certain criteria for that. And then they come with severe pneumonia, that is respiratory more than 30 per minute, respiratory resistance and saturation of less than 90% or 2 minutes. But on the contrary, and then they divide into the mild, moderate, and severe as a moderator. The WHO divides COVID into again three, but slightly different. That is, they have the non-severe, severe, and the critical part. Critical is that patient who have ARDS, sepsis, or septic shock. So this is the additional category which WHO defines for COVID-19 patients. So how does a patient come to, ideally in a hospital, and in our hospital, ideally all COVID hospitals should be a standalone centers. They should be separate entry and exit. The isolation should be in a dedicated ward, which probably all the hospitals have, and all hospitals by now have. The staff has been adequately trained by now. There is no role of investigations which we get probably on day one. Everybody is getting that D-dimer ferritin in patients who are in home isolation, or even patients who are with mild or moderate illness. There is no role of use of HRCT for diagnosis of COVID. Only investigations are to be done in patients with severe or critical illness, that is patients who are hypoxic and hospitalized. So briefly coming to the interventions which have proven benefit till now, the only drug which has stood its thing is steroids. The basic data came from the recovery trial with thousands of patients were recruited. The authors concluded that patients who have a rapid worsening on imaging and have hypoxia, they defined hypoxia less than 92%, a saturation less than 92%. They said that they will benefit from a dose for short course of steroid, that is between 3 to 10 days of dexamethasone, or equivalent dose of methylprednisolone, which turns out to be 32 milligrams per day of methylprednisolone. The other thing which has proven till now, because the COVID-19 is considered a growth from vortex state, so it is said that all patients who are hypoxic and are admitted should be on a prophylactic heparin, rather than, and if patients who have been given who are on ventilators or who have been given a monoclonal antibody like tocilizumab may be given therapeutic heparin. In all other patients, prophylactic heparin has a role. Then the normal supportive measures like stress as a prophylaxis and enteral nutrition is mainstay of treatment of COVID positive patients. Hypoxia, if the patient is at home and the saturation is below 95%, we always encourage prone ventilation. In admitted patients, nebulization should be avoided and never use is discouraged. This is how do you do prone ventilation. You can ask the patient to lie on his tummy. You can ask him to start with 30 minutes to 2 hours, and then on the side for 30 minutes to 2 hours, and then he can sit up and then on his side and again after. These are the ways you can promote awake proning at home in patients who are progressing to hypoxia. Interventions of limited benefit till now, where the first comes the conventional plasma. ICMR study that had said that conventional plasma has limited role. The patients who in the two they had done a placebo trial, in the randomized control trial, and they said that it is of limited use, and if it's used, it has to be used very early in mild to moderate cases. It has no role definite in patients who are critically and severe illness on ventilation. Remdesivir, this is one of the drugs which has an old history still to find a disease where it can be said that this is a drug of choice. It has been used in the past for SARS and MERS. And again, in COVID-19, the data is not very robust. Whatever data is again in the very early when the patient is hypoxic, but certain studies are for and against for remdesivir. There's a controversy about the dosage, the duration. 5 and 10, but as a protocol in the Indian protocol, we give it for 5 days. Drugs of no proven benefit, that is hydroxychloroquine. I would counter a Trump effect that we started using hydroxychloroquine, and various studies have shown that it has no role in the management or either prophylaxis of COVID-19. Data shows that there is no role of favipiravir, multivitamins, zinc, and whenever C and D, and ivermectin, doxycycline. There's a Cochrane review, the WHO review, the various international, all the international guidelines say that none of these drugs have a role in the treatment of either mild, moderate, or severe COVID-19. So, how do you stratify patients of COVID-19? Patients who can be managed at home are patients who have just mild influenza-like illness. They may be given, though HCQ, this is an old protocol, but now HCQ is not recommended. So,
sorry to interrupt, sir, but there is some disturbance in the voice, sir. So,
I'll probably take off my.
Right. Okay, sir. There is some problem because we are not able to hear properly. There is some disturbance in that. Please try them without the earphone.
Now it's fine?
Yes, lot better, sir. Please continue.
Discharge policy for patients COVID-19, we follow the the Ministry of Health guidelines, which are recently changed. Now they say that no COVID test is needed before discharge, and any patient who is 40 to 72 hours without hypoxia, without oxygen, can be discharged safely at home. This was the old discharge policy, which was before 4th of May. We used to do a negative COVID test for severe patients, but now a patient who is off oxygen can be discharged without a COVID test. So coming to WHO versus national guidelines for COVID management, which was the main topic of my talk today, the WHO had come out with guidelines, COVID-19 guidelines, which was, they had an update on 31st of March this year. The first guidelines were published somewhere in May 2020. And they say for ivermectin, they say there is no recommendation except in the context of clinical trial. They had reviewed about 5 or 6 RCTs and 6 or 7 observational studies, and they came to a conclusion that ivermectin has no definite role in the management of all forms of COVID-19. Same was true for hydrochloroquine, but the recommendation was even more stronger against the use of hydroxychloroquine in COVID-19. Lopinavir against a strong recommendation against remdesivir. They said that it can be added to usual care if the patient is hypoxic and the patient comes to the hospital within 10 days of onset of symptoms. And they said that we have to use in caution patients with underlying liver disease in which the enzymes are raised more than 5 times. We have to also use in caution patients who have a renal dysfunction. But the caveat is that the maximum benefit if it is used within the 10 days of onset of symptoms. There's no role after 10 days where they say that it just adds to the toxicity of the drug. Systemic steroids, based on the recovery trial, they said that definitely have a role in patients who were critically ill requiring hospitalization, who were hypoxic with a saturation of less than 92%. They said the dose is 6 milligrams or equivalent dose of hydrocortisone or methylprednisolone. And they said that we have to monitor the glucose levels if the patient are on steroids. They had a strong recommendation against use of steroids in the patients who do not have hypoxia. So they said no hypoxia, no steroids. So this was, and the recovery trial authors had mentioned that if you use steroids in patients who do not have low oxygen levels, it may be harmful to use steroids in this percentage of cases. And again, the dose which this wanted was same. The ICMR had recently come out with their guidelines, which were published on 22nd of April. They had divided the patients into mild disease, moderate, and severe disease. There was concept of high-risk category disease at age more than 60 years, cardiovascular disease. They were the patients who had who are more prone to COVID complications. And they had come out with guidelines. They had added ivermectin in the mild group, that even not taken out HCQ, and they had added budesonide based on a Lancet study which showed that patients who it was a by chance finding that patients who were taking budesonide, the incidence of COVID complication was less. These were the usual supportive measures in patients who were admitted in ICU, and then they had come with the off-label use of these drugs, that is remdesivir, tocilizumab, and convalescent plasma. Coming to the home isolation, very confusing. I have seen prescriptions up to 32 drugs in patients who are at home, all possible forms of allopathic, Ayurvedic, and homeopathic medicines in the same person. It's big business for everybody. But in PGI, we make it very simple. We say that only paracetamol every 4 to 6 hourly. That too, if the patient has fever and cough. In the second wave, we have seen that the fever sometimes prolongs up to 7 to 10 days, high-grade fever. So in the second week, we can consider giving ibuprofen or naproxen as an anti-inflammatory, never in the first 5 days. And we have to monitor the saturation if it is between. The most important part monitoring the patient at home is the saturation at baseline and the saturation after 6 minutes of normal walk. And this has to be done every 8 hours. If the patient, the saturation is dropping from 98 to up to 95, this monitoring has to be increased to 4 to 6 hours. But even if you have a saturation of less than 94%, please do not panic. You can start a budesonide inhaler, which PGI protocol recommends at home. It does not recommend any test like CT scan, ferritin, or any of the blood tests on home isolation. Only if you have hypoxia less than 92%, 94%, which is not improving after 24 hours of budesonide inhalation or a mild oxygen therapy at home, the tests are only recommended if you are admitted. These are some maneuvers which you can do at home. The foremost is prone ventilation. Take a lot of rest, and please do not go out on home isolation. In PGI, it's a team effort between the various departments. We have a dedicated COVID hospital, that is the NH, and now the Nehru Hospital. With the surge, many of the wards are being converted to COVID wards. So then I would say, stay safe, please vaccinate yourself. Dr. Madhu would be talking about the vaccinations. There are some drugs in the market. The availability of these drugs is improving day by day, but a cheap drug like steroids has to be used very cautiously and used at the right time. And please do not advocate steroids if the patients are not hypoxic. Thank you very much. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for such a comprehensive and complete picture of the management and guidelines of COVID-19. People will have a lot of questions. We can have those questions at the end of the session. You can put your question and answer questions in the chat box, and they'll be taken up at the end. I'd like to invite Dr. Kirti Iyengar for a few words now. Dr. Kirti.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Suri, for such a comprehensive presentation. I would like to just mention and interrupt this whole flow of sessions just for a minute to mention that we have with us Mr. Srinivas Shroff, who is the Chief Executive Officer of REC Foundation. REC Foundation is supporting this whole intervention, which is primarily to work in 3 states and to improve the quality of maternal and reproductive health care. However, at the time of COVID, we have decided to focus also as COVID response, that is the bitter need. So, Mr. Srinivas, would you like to say a word?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Iyengar. It's a pleasure to be here. I just want to say a few things. Earlier in the first wave, REC was particularly supporting ration, etc. About 100,000 people in who are doing power evacuation, power systems work, the workers, the migrant workers, etc. So that they don't run away and our systems don't stop. So that was the focus during the first wave. And interesting things we also did was, non-contact verification app, we supported Mumbai Central. Mumbai Central actually has a footfall of about 5 lakh people. But during the COVID times, it was reduced to something like 2 lakh. Now, we are trying to support, of course, there are guidance from the government. We are trying to support 2-3 things. One is the oxygen plant at the district level, district hospitals and community health centers and any government hospital. So in fact, we sent out a small RFP seeking these results, and through this media, I see almost 150 people are there. We would like to support primarily the government facilities because CSR doesn't allow us to support the private, though they are also doing immense work. Unfortunately, CSR rules don't allow that. So that is one area, oxygen plants establishment. That second thing is some kind of a makeshift arrangement also we are considering, but mostly on the oxygen plant and strengthening the ICU facility. This kind of are providing some pipelines to supply the oxygen, etc. So this is what we are supporting right now, and in fact that's why I actually couldn't track your invitation properly. I joined just late because since the RFP has gone out, so many people are reaching out to me, the district commissioners, etc., and their staff who want to. We have to quicken the whole process. So we are trying to do that. And thank you for inviting me to talk. I don't have much. There are experts who are talking, and we should be listening now. Donors time. Donors. We have done that part of the thing, but it's important for us to hear the experts. I heard the earlier expert speaking on various things. Very helpful, and I think you are coordinating such important sessions. Thank you very much. I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Mr. Srinivas. Over to you, Dr. Neena.
Thank you, Dr. Kirti. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Bharti to give her insights into the management of pregnancy during COVID-19.
Hello, is it visible?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Okay. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity and sharing our experience of COVID-19 management in pregnancy. So I have tried to make this PPT with the help of existing clinical guidelines, available evidence so far from 2020, good practice and expert opinion. So why we think whenever there is a new kind of infection, viral or bacterial, we have to think differently. Because a critical component in the management of any communicable disease is that we have to care of a vulnerable populations, and definitely pregnancy comes in that. Because there is a kind of immunomodulation in the pregnancy, although sometimes it has been said that pregnancy is a immunosuppressed state, but better to call it as an immunomodulation because there is a shift of dominance from T1 to T2. And this is to avoid the fetal rejection. But somehow when there is a lower down level of T1 type of cells, some kind of infection in the form of viral infection supervenes. So definitely we have to think in pregnancy differently. And other associated changes like cardiorespiratory changes are there, kidney changes are there. So they make the pregnant woman to combat with infection differently. So what is the experience so far? Whenever there was an alarm raised in March 2020 regarding COVID-19 pandemic in India, we were thinking the way, what is going to happen in these pregnant women? Are they going to behave differently when there will be going to have a COVID-19 infection in these women? And what about the vertical transmission? And if it is like so, what we are going to do? Whether we should deliver them normally or we should proceed for the cesarean sections. So whatever we learned in 2020, the conclusion was made after analysis of management of 33,000 pregnancies that pregnant women with SARS-CoV-2 virus have not fared much worse than the non-pregnant counterparts. They are equally affected with same kind of clinical scenario. And large number of these females presented, they were totally asymptomatic. And in most of the centers, because we were not knowing exactly the precaution measures and how there is a need of there is a chance of vertical transmission. So most of the people opted for cesarean rate, which rose to 52% when the first wave of COVID pandemic came in India also. And what about the fetus? So whatever literature we have about our management, whatever we try to recapitulate from other data, there was no data suggested an increased rate of miscarriage or early pregnancy loss. There is no evidence of any teratogenicity so far. And it is not an indication for medical termination of pregnancy if a female has a COVID-19 infection in first trimester or second trimester. And that definitely there was a very minimal chance of vertical transmission, which was about to be said as 1%. But is it different in today's scenario? Probably let us look at. In 2021, although it is maybe as early to say, symptomatic pregnant woman infection is on the rise. It is not so as we have seen in 2020. Even we are seeing that they are symptomatic and severity of this disease is seemingly very high this time. Although the absolute risk of COVID-19 infection in pregnancy may remain same, but it is now established that pregnant women are definitely at increased risk of COVID-19 associated illness compared with non-pregnant women. So this conclusion is totally different what came in the first wave. So this is a FIGO statement which was made into 2nd March 2021. So now, if it is like so these patients who are coming to us, so how we have to make our strategies so that we can streamline our management of COVID-19 pregnancy management. As I already said, pregnancy is an immunomodulator state. Hence, as per ICMR guidelines, we have to consider that pregnant women fall into category B. If we look into the management categories of ICMR, they have categorized the patients coming with COVID-19 as category A, asymptomatic healthy individual, non-pregnant female with no comorbidities. But they have said that a category B comes in the category B patients are those who are stable, but they can have a comorbidity or they can be immunocompromised or immunomodulated. So pregnancy automatically falls into the category B of ICMR categorization. So what is now to be done if it is like so that pregnancy is already in a category B? A thorough history, especially about COVID symptomatology, we have to go for the thorough examination, general and obstetrical examination is required, whether we further need to have categorization of this category to make our treatment plans. So categorization of COVID-19 in pregnancy, we are doing in such a way that if a patient who has come to us, and as per now also, we are testing all the pregnant females coming to our institutions per the guidelines that any patient who is needing intervention within 5 days of delivery. So we are testing all pregnant females, and all the females who have come incidentally positive, they are automatically category B1. They have come to us, we tested them because they required a delivery, but somehow the report came as positive. So they are category B1, asymptomatic pregnant woman. Another scenario can be that female has presented to us, she has pregnancy and despite that she has the symptoms of fever, cough, rhinitis, diarrhea, fatigue, or she can have other comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension, liver disease. In such case, this female will fall into a category of B2 and we have to think differently for this patient as compared to category B1 patient. And sometimes we are seeing patient coming to us in a with a history of fever for 5 days, shortness of breath, chest pain, drowsiness, hypotension, hemoptysis, and cyanosis. These are the red flag signs. So basically, these patients have to put directly into the category C. So categorization can be overlapping and interchanging. So sometimes we have to assess a category B2 may after 48 hours become B1. And similarly, a category B1 after sometimes may become B2 and B2 may become C. So there has to be a periodical assessment of all the categories in pregnancy also, so that a treatment strategy can be directed accordingly. So now if we understand, other features which we have to look for is like severe fatigue, malaise and persistent fever, although not to be said as red flag signs, but they although indicate that there is a kind of active disease going on. And sometimes if these symptoms persists for so long after 7 to 10 days, there is an indication to further evaluate such females with pro-inflammatory markers. And one can expect deterioration in such kind of subsets. So although we have to understand that sometimes in these cases also we are seeing that pregnant females, they have a prolonged fever even up to lasting 2 weeks. So these females have to be watched closely and investigated, so on. So clinical stages of severity, how can we categorize a female who has come to us in a stage, she's a category B2, but we have to look for other parameters so that we can titrate our treatment accordingly. A patient who has mild disease, this means that she doesn't have any complaint of breathlessness, she doesn't have hypoxia, her respiratory rate is less than 24 minutes, her saturation is more than 94% on room air, and otherwise she is asymptomatic. Patient can be moderate, she can have a dyspnea, she can be hypoxic. Then you have to look for other factors like her SpO2 range, whether it is on room air, whether it is on 91 to 94%, her respiratory rate is in the range of 24 to 29, whether there are associated fever or cough. And severity may be that she may have a respiratory rate of more than 30 and she may have a saturation of more than 90%, less than 90% with pulse rate of more than 125. So this will help us in further categorization of disease severity. So when to admit such patients and how to guide them. Now I have talked about category B1 patient who has come to us like 24-weeker, 26-weeker female. She has come to us. She was a minor placenta previa. I have seen her and somehow the report has come as positive. So any female who is in the category B1 and there is no indication for obstetrical intervention. So this point has to be made clear that such patient can be opted for home isolation. So she is a category B1 patient and we feel that there is no obstetrical indication. The bleeding has stopped. I have observed her for 48 hours and she's a category B1 patient. I don't find that I should obstetrically intervene. So these females can be allowed to have a home isolation by giving the proper advice, which we at the present scenario knows properly. So dietary advice as well as avoidance of total bed rest has to be emphasized because we know that in COVID-19, the thromboembolic phenomena are more and pregnancy itself is a thrombogenic state. So we have to tell that she has to remain ambulatory in her own chamber or in her own room and she has to take up plenty of fluids. And despite that, we have to do a kind of risk assessment even after providing home isolation, whether she should be given a prophylactic heparin even for the home isolation or not. So I am going to tell that later on. So the patient has to be told that she has to report to the nearest facility if her saturation in the home isolation falls below 94%. And in pregnancy also, we have to advise them to go for a walk test. So walk test, how to do that walk test? In the pregnancy, the patient has to walk for 6 minutes at the normal pace. Or they say you can take a 40 steps and she has to look for her saturation before going for walk test and then after doing the walk test. If the fall is more than 3% from her baseline, so this raises an alarm and probably she has to consult further because this can be a detection of hypoxia. Now, what about category B2 patients? B1 patients, definitely home isolation with the proper advice, fulfilling all the criteria by explaining them the alarming signs. Now, coming to the category B2 patients, these are the patients, all patients have to be evaluated by making them indoor because these are the patients who are really symptomatic and we have to look for their progression of the disease. So, by admitting them, we are just giving them paracetamol or antitussives for their symptoms. Like paracetamol can be given 500 milligram 4 to 6 hourly, and antitussives can be given also 3 times a day. Apart from that, we are continuing her iron, calcium, and folic acid, and we can have her baseline investigations in pregnancy if she is probably unevaluated because sometimes we have seen there are so many comorbidities, so many cholestasis. She can be a diabetic, which is left undiagnosed. So at least we should have a baseline lab parameters to further compare as well as to know that she doesn't have any other kind of pregnancy-related comorbidity. And anytime you feel that there is a kind of X-ray, chest X-ray, one should get it done with shielding. And we need to know that only a single X-ray exposure, there is a hardly of 0.01 millirad. So this is not as such teratogenic. And if it is indicated for patients' clinical management, the one should directly go for it. And then additional markers like D-dimer, ferritin, CPK have to be sent for few cases, that is persistent of symptoms. She is coming to us, we feel for first 2 days she was totally fine, for the next day, and then after 2-3 days there is a persistent of fevers, or patient has a tachycardia of more than 120, or we feel that her saturation is falling. So we have to basically categorize accordingly, and then we can think of additional pro-inflammatory and sepsis marker accordingly. Then looking, as we have already talked about, that these patients can be given a budesonide 800 mg twice a day as an inhaler for suppression of cough if it is not relieved by the antitussives. They should be monitored thrice daily, definitely while indoor, by temperature, pulse rate, respiratory rate, SpO2 and walk test. And once patient has been worked up, and after 48 hours, I feel that all the baseline parameters are normal. Either patient has become febrile or the severity of fever has declined and she is totally comfortable, then she can also be sent for home isolation if there is no obstetrical indication for any kind of intervention. Now coming to category C. We are seeing such patients these days. These are the patients who are requiring multidisciplinary care and must therefore be admitted in a COVID designated hospitals with multidisciplinary team. A thorough history, especially with regard to COVID symptoms, extensive review of records and well-done general obstetrical examination is must. But one thing we have to remember, that whenever such patients are coming to us, please be focused on obstetrical complications as such, because these features are overlapping with the pre-eclampsia developing into pulmonary edema, or it can be a pericardium cardiomyopathy. We have done in 2 patients, it was diagnosed, because these patients, they are turning out to be COVID positive. They are presenting with respiratory distress. We are seeing chest infiltrates. But when the obstetrical examination and our other investigations were done simultaneously, we could diagnose a case of PPCM in one patient. It was a pulmonary edema in another patient, secondary to pre-eclampsia. So our focus should not be only to the COVID-19 severity, because we are dealing with pregnant females. We have to look for other comorbid conditions which can lead to such kind of presentations in pregnancy. And definitely I have already said that chest imaging, even if indicated a HRCT chest for her clinical management, in discussion with pulmonologists, we can, or other ICU people, we can always go for even HRCT chest, because exposure is not so much as said to be the teratogenic of potential. Now, one must know when we are basically admitting these patients, what investigations we are need to go for. Baseline investigations I have already said. Then clinically indicated, I am talking about as a chest X-ray in case of persistence of fever, cough, and then hypoxia. And other symptoms for inflammatory markers which we are getting done for these patients are D-dimer, ferritin, LDH, and procalcitonin if she has a persistent of fevers and we are suspicious of some kind of other sepsis. So we need to have a blood culture and other things. And these investigations have to be repeated 48 hours, because sometimes decision of adding further treatment is depending upon the rising levels of these inflammatory markers. So we can always look for the rising trends or the type of trends of these or pro-inflammatory markers as well as the baseline markers. In a case who has an immunocompromised patients like transplant or HIV, we have to look for other opportunistic infections, so on. And one must know, because these are the things which are new to us also. So at least we should not get confused, because pregnancy has some kind of inherent lab parameter changes. So we need to know what exactly we have to interpret when such a value comes to us. So for CRP, it is less than 5, but it is considered to be significant, that is markedly increased. So sometimes in literature, it has been said that our more than 75 or it is more than 100 milligram. And D-dimer, have seen many patients getting worried, because otherwise in non-pregnant female or any non-pregnant female or any male, the reference range is below 500. But in pregnancy, definitely we have seen it is going up to 3000 in last trimester. And some people are worried that her D-dimers are markedly high, but they are not so as looking at the pregnancy range, and they revert to normal within 72 hours of the delivery. Then looking at the ferritin level and LDH level also, and you have to look for the neutrophilic lymphocytic ratio as well as the absolute lymphocytic count. So One other things we have to look for, it's not only saturation, we have to look for her heart rate, we have to look for her vitals, BP, respiratory rate also, so that we can titrate what kind of monitoring and what kind of basically type of oxygenation or oxygen support she is requiring. What about steroid trigger? We have talked about that budesonide can be given, but definitely we are seeing these days the patients who are coming to us after 5 or 7 or 8 days of illness, having shortness of breath for so many days, and they are coming to us with 60 or 70% of saturation. And when we are giving oxygen support, and after that we are looking for other parameters, and we feel that there is a need of a kind of steroids for these patients, then definitely the type of steroids which can be given in pregnancy also, they are the steroids in form of dexamethasone, or they are the steroids in form of methylprednisolone, as already said. So I will elaborate how we can give them. Then what about low molecular heparin? So definitely we are little overcautious in pregnancy, because we say pregnancy itself is a thrombogenic factor scoring 1. So at least even for a 1 more score, because COVID is taken as a transient risk factor for any kind of thrombogenic potential. So any more risk factor in pregnancy, even patient is sitting at home, we are giving her we are giving her heparin at home also. And definitely how we are giving 40 milligrams subcutaneous OD if she is between 50 to 90 kg, 60 milligrams if she is 90 to 130 kg. Low molecular weight heparin has to be stopped 12 hours prior to delivery, which we are following in the normal patients. And therapeutic dose definitely is indicated when a patient of category C presented to us in emergency. Now, how long we have to continue this? For the patient who are in home isolation, and we feel that she is patient is only obese, but otherwise there is no risk factor, definitely pregnancy is there. Pregnancy is there, there is a COVID. So this patient can be given on home isolation only a 10 days heparin, or patient doesn't have any kind of symptom. But the patient who is hospitalized with us, she is category B2, I'm going to deliver her. So delivery and after postpartum also, till 10 days at least, I'm going to give her heparin. Another thing has come into the light, the rule of low dose aspirin, although there is no study as such in pregnancy, but this has been said to be worked in the basically in a severe cases of moderate to severe cases of COVID-19. Then VT scoring, definitely we are going to do in pregnancy as different as said by the RCOG and RCOG guidelines. I have already said that we have to continue 10 days postpartum, and a patient who has a significant comorbidities, even if it can be given with the 6 weeks postpartum. The patients who have a previous history of thrombophilias or any kind of DVT in the pregnancy, so these it can be extended, prolonged also. What about antibiotics as such in our protocol? For the persistent fever, we are giving azithromycin, or the patient who is coming with us with ground glass opacities or any kind of infection, we are giving injections ceftriaxone. What about remdesivir? We have given in few patients in our pregnant female who has come to us with category C, and so far we have not seen that any teratogenic potential is there, and whatever is there available in literature, people have given depending upon the maternal indication, they have not seen any kind of severe effect on the fetus. And but what exactly said is that it has to be started within 10 days of onset of symptoms. So recommended dose of remdesivir is 200 milligram IV on day 1, followed by IV for OD for 4 days. And for that, we have to get her RFTs and LFTs to be done. Ivermectin and favipiravir are contraindicated in pregnancies, because these are the drugs who are incorporated as a state protocol for the home isolation. But we don't have to give this kind of drugs to the pregnant female. What about tocilizumab? This is a drug which has shown a very good effect. There is a recovery trial who has come on 1st May 2021, and definitely they have shown that there is a drastic improvement in the morbidity as well as the clinical recovery of the patient. And the data, whatever we have so far, is only for the 12 pregnant females. That was a retrospective concluded data, and in that it was not found that any kind of fetal teratogenicity was seen. And sometimes, however, it has been said that it causes the immunosuppression of the fetus, but so far we have not observed such kind of data. Now, when to deliver? Decision for delivery is to be taken purely on the obstetrical grounds. Sometimes we have done the decision for resuscitative purpose. It is like a patient whose oxygen requirement is given is increasing. And despite NIV, HFNC, even invasive ventilation, patient is on invasive ventilation, and despite giving the maximum support, the patient her saturations are not improving, and there is a concept of proning. So to ease out that proning also, we have to do the cesarean. So we have done in 2 patients in our institute. What about intrapartum care? Labor should be conducted in a dedicated COVID room, and monitoring with the CTG or handheld Doppler, because we cannot hear while wearing PP with stethoscope, and decision for cesarean section as per obstetrical indication. Breastfeeding definitely can be permitted. We are already clear from our basically experience. We have to encourage oral hydration, ambulation of the pregnant patient. And what about antibiotic prophylaxis guideline? I could not find any data that what should be given, whether COVID-19 females post-operatively should be given any kind of antibiotics, but they say you follow your institutional protocol, but because we know that in a PP it is not, the proper scrubbing is not possible. So as per institutional protocol, we have given for 72 hours, we have given IV antibiotics to all post-cesarean patients, and so far we have not seen an increased rate of any SSI in these patients. So what about FIGO statement regarding COVID-19 vaccination for pregnant and breastfeeding women? Actually, they have experience from UK, they have experience from USA, where the vaccination has been given to the pregnant female. There are no risks. They say whether it is actual or theoretical. So definitely vaccination outweighs the risk of infection of pregnant women. So they support that COVID-19 vaccination should be given. Although they say there is not sufficient data to recommend routine use of COVID vaccinations. However, 20,000 pregnant women, whatever they were vaccinated in USA, they have found that there were no adverse effects. So what they say, you empower women to make informed choices. Following a risk-based approach in some countries. Risk-based approach means a female who is pregnant, who is a healthcare worker. A female pregnant with comorbidities. Sometimes they are approaching those females for vaccination. But RCOG, ACOG, they say no, it should not be risk-based. It should be for all. No preference should be given. And it is advisable that COVID-19 vaccine series should be administered. And if somehow there a protocol comes to us also after some time that vaccination has to be given, they say it should not be clubbed with any kind of vaccination which is given routine in pregnancy, like flu vaccination, like tetanus vaccination. They say better to give a gap of 14 days before or after. So at least what protocol has been followed outside is they are giving a gap of at least 14 days for vaccination. And women planning their pregnancy, they say there is no need to do a pregnancy test. If she has come to you for vaccination, please give it. But definitely we are thinking still different from all others. Current recommendations on COVID-19, we yesterday have an advisory from GOI, as well as we have a still FOGC, which still says that the recommendations from had that pregnant and lactation as are contraindications for the vaccinations, and both are based on the sound principle that we do not have any safety data so far, and the vaccination which we have started is still on the trial basis. Now, what about our PGI experience? The first time we have our case on the 1st May 2020, and till Feb 2021, almost we have dealt with 202 pregnant or postpartum female who was COVID positive. And look at the things. It was 96% of them were totally asymptomatic. It was just a finding that they have come to us. We have tested as per ICMR protocol, and none of them were severely sick. Only 4% were symptomatic, and 3 patients out of them have COVID pneumonia, which was just recovered after giving antibiotics and steroids. That was also oral steroids. Now, look at the second data. This is the second wave. For 15 days, we didn't have any patient. Then after that, on 1st March and till date, in last 2 months, we have total 95 females who have come to us. Now see the picture, asymptomatic are only 25. They are 26% of total chunk. Flu-like mild symptoms and mild hypoxia. They are coming to us with mild hypoxia. We are keeping them on venti mask. They are recovering after oral steroids and with the normal sportive care. They are the patients who have a 51 out of total 95. And severe disease, these are the females who are 19 in number. Almost 20% of total who has presented to us. Out of these females, 3 require even intubation. We have lost 1 patient out of them. And these are the patients who have presented to us with moderate to severe COVID ARDS. Out of these patients, we have given tocilizumab for 5 patients. And out of these 5 patients, 1 patient expired. 4 survived, and out of these patients, 3 patients have already delivered, and we have not seen any kind of fetal problems so far. And rest of the 12 females, they also require remdesivir. All of them were given remdesivir and 5 were given tocilizumab. So I request all of you to stay healthy and safe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Bharti. From your presentation, it is very clear that the present wave of COVID-19, it's weighing heavily on the pregnant women. Like in your from your statistics, it's obvious that 20% of them had severe disease. So we need to be very careful, and we need to have close monitoring of pregnant women. And we have to be very particular about comorbidities, as there may be overlapping of comorbidities with pregnancy and with COVID-19. So that is the carry home message, that all pregnant women, they require close monitoring and close supervision. Thank you. Thank you so much. So now I'd like to invite Dr. Madhu Gupta. She'll give us a talk on the update on COVID-19 vaccines.
Thank you, Dr. Neena. Briefly, I'll be talking about COVID-19 vaccines. So we know this is the picture currently, WHO dashboard, and we have about 15 crore confirmed cases overall. And yesterday we have about 6,44,000 new cases in the world. And the region wise now, earlier in the first wave, Southeast Asia region was not that affected, but in this wave, this region is very much affected as compared to America, Europe, and other countries. And looking at Indian scenario, so this is on 5th May, we have about 3,57,229 cases, but yesterday it touched actually more than 4 lakh cases. So this wave is the second wave, which is not coming down, which is the sad part, and there a lot of deaths are occurring. So for a vaccinologist, it is very, very important to just briefly understand what is the structure of the coronavirus. So it belongs to a large family of enveloped positive stranded RNA virus, coronaviridae, and it is the alpha and beta types which infect the human. So this is a pretty looking virus. So these are with the proteins, mainly proteins and nucleoproteins and genomic RNA. So this is the spike protein and spike glycoprotein, through which it basically binds with the respiratory cells, and most of the vaccines, they are targeted to produce antibodies against this spike protein so that it does not get entry into our body. But there are other proteins also, like membrane proteins, nucleoproteins, and heme agglutinin esterase, and well as small membrane protein, which also produce antibodies, but they are not very protective as compared to the antibodies against the spike glycoprotein. So this is how it affects on inhalation. These are the spike protein, and it attaches to the ACE2 receptors on the respiratory cells of the lungs, and once it is inside, it reassembles, and then it is released into the body and presents to the antigen presenting cells, where it produces T cell dependent immunity. So which is a good immunity because it produces both cell mediated and humoral immunity, which is good. So it produces memory cells, B cells, as well as cell mediated immunity. So this is the immune response which we see after natural infection. So this is the time period when you have got the infection. So this is your incubation period, varies from 2 days to 14 days, on an average 8 days. And then you first have the innate response, and it takes, and virus is detectable for some time, and then the cellular response starts activating, and within about 8 days, you see IgM levels rising, and within 10 days, IgG level rising. So it takes about 2 weeks time to develop the antibodies. So this is the adaptive immune response after the innate response, which starts 6 to 8 days after the natural infection, and also after giving the vaccination. So cell-mediated immunity through CD8 cells and CD4 cells, and humoral immunity by B cells, which produce antibodies, IgM and IgG, and also memory cells. So having memory cells is a good thing because then antibodies can be formed by the body later on. So these are some of the antibodies against COVID-19. So you can see from this diagram the components of SARS-CoV-2 virus neutralizing antibodies. They bind to the viral proteins. This particular neutralizing antibody. So this antibody, which is very, very important for vaccines, and this is the antibody which will protect us from the virus and the disease. And although it produces other types of RNA, other types of antibodies, but they may not be effective in neutralizing the virus. So how vaccines are developed? So vaccines are developed basically in two stages: preclinical stage and clinical stage. Preclinical stage is done in animals, and the main focus is to look at the toxicology and the safety, as well as efficacy, immunological response. Clinical studies have four phases, and phase 1 clinical trial. These are conducted among small groups of healthy adult volunteers, basically to see the safety. Phase 2 clinical trials are randomized controlled trials, and these are conducted among about 100 participants, 100 to 200. And the basic idea is to test for safety as well as immunogenicity, the immunogenic response. It is a phase 3 clinical trial, which is very, very important. Once this safety and immunogenicity is established in phase 1 and phase 2, the regulators give the approval to conduct the phase 3 trials, which is conducted among thousands of people. And in this phase, vaccine efficacy is tested. And of course, safety is the component in all the phases. So vaccine efficacy, basically you actually estimate what is the incidence of disease among the vaccinated as compared of the incidence of disease among the unvaccinated. So it will give you percentage reduction of the disease because of the vaccine. So this information is important for the regulators to give license to the manufacturers to bring the vaccine into the market. So once they clear this stage, then there's a phase 4 post-marketing surveillance, where the studies are mostly observatory studies and observational studies, and where you monitor the long-term effects of the vaccine or side effects of the vaccines. So generally, it takes, in a traditional vaccine development, it takes about 10 years to conduct this, to complete the vaccine trials, including preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and finally distribution. So it takes about 10 years. But in COVID-19 situation, because of the public health emergency, most of these phases were conducted in parallel to each other, so that we could have the vaccine at the earliest, and we could have the vaccine in a year's time, as you have already seen. And many of the approvals were done like before the completion of the phase 3, using the preliminary data just to save population from the disease. But they have taken into consideration the safety and immunogenicity. And I am sure that they have not skipped that part, and safety is taken into consideration when they have given approval for conducting the phase 3 trials. So briefly about the types of coronavirus vaccine approaches. So there are 4 approaches. So virus vaccine, whole cell type of vaccines, like live attenuated and killed. So live attenuated, where you basically culture and subculture the vaccine so that it no longer becomes virulent, but it can produce the antibodies. And inactivated is a dead virus. So once inoculated, it produces only the antibodies or immune response. So Covaxin by Bharat Biotech is a type of a killed vaccine. Viral vector vaccine, herein you take a harmless virus like adenovirus. So, and you insert a coronavirus spike gene into this virus, and it could be of 2 types, replicating and non-replicating. In the replicating type, this harmless virus like adenovirus, which is a virus of the chimpanzees, but does not harm the humans, it replicates inside the body and present to the antigen presenting cells to produce the immune response. But the non-replicating viral vector, herein the virus does not replicate. It actually functions like a killed vaccine, and killed vaccine, and it basically puts the antigen, this coronavirus spike gene, to produce the antigens, which leads to immune response. So Many of our good vaccines like by Oxford, AstraZeneca, Sputnik V vaccine, and also the Chinese vaccine they are using, and Johnson & Johnson vaccine, they are using this technology to produce the vaccines. Covishield is also based upon this technology because they have got this technology from the Oxford and AstraZeneca. Then third type is the DNA and RNA nucleic acid vaccines, wherein they take the DNA material and they use this material and it is being inserted into the body, which then produce the viral proteins, which is being presented to the antigen presenting cells to produce the immune response. In case of RNA, it is being encased in a lipid coat and then it is inserted and produce the immune response. So these vaccines are very fragile and they have to be kept in a stringent temperature like -70s or -20. So examples we have is the Pfizer, Moderna, which are RNA vaccines. Zydus Cadila is being, they are also producing vaccine in India, which is based upon DNA. That is a DNA vaccine. So another type is a protein-based vaccines like Novavax they are producing, where we are using subunits or virus-like particles. So these subunits, protein subunits are spike proteins or M proteins. Once they are inserted inside the body, they are presented to the antigen-presenting cells and produce the immune response. Similarly, virus-like particles. So these are nanoparticles, you can say, like Novavax is based upon this technology of producing the vaccines. So, they're slightly weak, so we need adjuvants with these types of vaccines. So these are the main 4 approaches, and about 250 vaccines are being developed, and there are few which have reached phase 3 stage. So some of the results I'm going to share with you, especially related to vaccine efficacy. So Moderna mRNA vaccine, the phase 3 trial, these studies are all published in New England Journal of Medicine. They showed, and these results are preliminary results, and they've shown an efficacy of 94.1%, which is quite high. And it is available in US, Canada, and UK, and UAE as well. Storage temperature is -20 degrees centigrade. Pfizer mRNA vaccine phase 3 trial have shown efficacy of 95%. And storage temperature is -70 degrees. So in India, we could not have these vaccines, but now the market is open and we are saying that if they want, they can come to the private sector to give this vaccine. So efficacy is really very high and it is being given in US. Another vaccine which is based upon viral vector technology, and Johnson & Johnson Janssen's vaccine, which is phase 3 trial results have shown an efficacy of 66 to 76.6%, which is among elderly more than 60 years and after 14 days of vaccination. Good point of this vaccine is that it is a single dose vaccine, but efficacy is comparatively on the lower side. Then coming to the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, the phase 3 trial have shown an efficacy of 62.1% when the standard dose is given and about 90% when half dose followed by a full dose was given. So total average was they have taken as 70.4%. But they have published a revised efficacy data of these trials, which shows that if you increase the duration between the 2 doses to more than or equal to 12 weeks, the efficacy increased to 81.3%. So based upon this data, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India have actually increased the gap between the 2 doses of Covishield vaccine from 4 weeks earlier to now 6 to 8 weeks to increase the vaccine efficacy. So this Russian vaccine, Sputnik V, this has also got emergency license in India. So its interim analysis show a very high efficacy of 91.6%. Then Sinovac, this is from China, and their results have shown efficacy of 50.65% for all cases, 83% for cases requiring medical treatment, 100% for hospitalized, severe and fatal cases. So it is 100% for severe cases. So, and all these phase 3 trials have shown that efficacy for severe disease is almost more than 97%. It is almost nearly 100% for severe and hospitalized cases. So coming to this Indian vaccine, Covaxin by Bharat Biotech. So the phase 1 results were quite promising, where it was found to be safe and it was immunogenic. Phase 2 studies have also shown that this dose, 6 microgram dose, was good to take it to the phase 3 efficacy trials. And efficacy trials have shown that it is 78% effective. So efficacy of Bharat Biotech was found to be 78%. And this efficacy against severe COVID-19 disease was 100%, with an impact on reduction in hospitalization. So, and against asymptomatic, this is also important, the efficacy against asymptomatic COVID-19 infection was 70%, suggesting decreased transmission in Covaxin recipients. So this is also important, that it will reduce transmission. So WHO says any study, any vaccine which has efficacy of 50% or more is a good efficacy, especially in a pandemic situation. And all these vaccines have shown a good efficacy. And this is emergency use authorization, which is given by regulators to manage public health emergency before the actual regulatory approvals after completion of phase 3 trials. And so many companies are now giving these vaccines, and Israel is #1. So they have completed nearly 70 to 80% of their population. They have vaccinated, and India has also started from 16th January. India has also started. So these are the vaccines which are available in India: Covishield, Covaxin, Zydus Cadila DNA vaccine, phase 3 trials. Sputnik V almost got the approval. And we have Novavax from Serum Institute of India is working on Novavax. So these are the important ones. So this Covishield vaccine is a vector vaccine, and the Serum Institute of India and ICMR are developing this. PJ is also one of the participating center for conducting the phase 2 and 3 trials in India. And I'm the investigator for that. Another second vaccine is the Covaxin vaccine, which is a killed vaccine available in India and given all over India. Then side effects, there are no serious adverse effect has been reported till now. Vaccines are safe and well tolerated. Local side reactions are like injection site pain, tenderness, warmth, redness, swelling, induration, itching has been reported. And systemic symptoms include malaise, muscle ache, joint pain, fatigue, nausea, headache, chills, feverishness with the temperature of 30 degrees centigrade or higher. Rare side effect of 1 in 100,000 blood clots in brain with low platelets are reported, possibly due to rare immune response with AstraZeneca vaccine. However, they say, the European Medicine Agency, they say overall benefits of this vaccine in preventing COVID-19 outweigh the risk of this side effect. So it is quite safe. Among pregnant and lactating women, so as Dr. Bharti has already mentioned, in Indian setting, there is no data, no trials done on this group, need to balance risk and benefit. Ministry says not to be given, but as Dr. Bharti has said, that FIGO has advised that it should be given, that ACOG also recommends, especially vaccines like Pfizer and Moderna. There are studies available and which shows that it is safe and immunogenic among pregnant women and lactating women. So these vaccines can be given, but in India, since we are giving Covaxin and Covishield, so ministry is not recommending to give those vaccines. Once Pfizer and Moderna vaccine will be available, these vaccines can be considered to be given to the pregnant women. Among pediatric age group, children have more ACE level in serum than adults. Considering the opposite relation between ACE and ACE2, this variability reflects a lower level of ACE2 expression in children in comparison to adults. So children could act as the carriers of the virus. Children are susceptible to SARS-CoV-2 contagion, but considerably without prominent disease, giving the chance that children could act as the mediators for viral transmission and amplification. And in the second wave, it has been seen that children are also getting affected and they're also getting serious disease. So, it can lead to multi-system inflammatory syndrome. So the trials in Indian setting are not being conducted, but AstraZeneca Oxford group, they have started the trials among 6 to 17 years of age. Sinovac Biotech has also started the trials in 3 to 17 years of age. And Pfizer says trials of COVID vaccine in children aged 12 to 15, they have shown 100% efficacy and a strong immune response, and they are going for emergency authorization. So which is a good sign that we will be giving this vaccine to, vaccine will be available in the age group of 12 to 15 years of age as well. Regarding the variant, so the data says that Covaxin and Covishield are effective against double mutant Indian strain B1617. There are neutralizing studies on that, and it says that they are able to neutralize the variant as well against UK strain B117 as well as Brazilian strain, which is P1. They are effective. Although AstraZeneca have shown that its efficacy was 75% against UK strain and 10% against South African strain, but this also they have revised and they have seen that efficacy is much higher among the South African strain as well. So this is a very good news, and the vaccine currently available are effective against the mutant strain as well. So this is the National Expert Group on Vaccine in India. They are the think tank who decides what and how this vaccine to be available in Indian setting. So after the launch, we have these two vaccines available. For Covishield, the gap is 6 to 8 weeks. For Covaxin, it is 4 weeks. Route of administration is intramuscular in the upper arm, the deltoid. And post-vaccination, 30 minutes observation period has to be observed. Age group is 18 years and above. Recently, 18 years and above age is permitted, but because of the lack of supply, it is limited, even in limited settings. This is an important point, that interchangeability is not permitted. Like if you have taken 1 dose of Covishield, you should be taking that second dose of Covishield only. There are no studies on interchangeability of the vaccine, so that should not be done. So these are various priority groups, but now it is open for all. So immunity after vaccination. It actually, if you see this diagram, after the first dose, the primary immune response is up till this much, and it comes after 14 days of the first dose, and then it declines. This is the time that booster has to be taken. So in case of Covaxin, it is about 4 weeks. In case of Covishield, it is 6 to 8 weeks. Once you take this second dose, then only you achieve this level of immunity, which is the protective level. So this second dose of vaccine is very, very important, and the secondary immune response is faster and larger. So we are aiming that everybody should achieve this level of protectiveness. Prevention of infection and disease after vaccination. Vaccines are effective in preventing severe disease, hospitalization, and deaths. They're efficacious in preventing 70 to 80% of the disease. However, vaccine reduces the chances of infection and transmissibility, but do not completely prevent it. So you can still get the infection. So keep wearing masks, physical distancing, and hand hygiene. And following persons can be vaccinated: with person with past history of COVID infection or RT-PCR positive illness, history of any chronic disease, morbidities, cardiac, neurological, pulmonary, metabolic, renal, malignancies, all can be given the vaccine. Even immunodeficient people, HIV positive patients, patient on immunosuppression due to any condition, so can be offered the vaccine. Only in these cases, the response to the vaccine may be less. Who should avoid? Only person with history of allergic reaction to COVID-19 vaccine or immediate or delayed onset of anaphylaxis due to COVID-19 vaccine only should be avoided. And since we do not have a data from India on pregnant and lactating women and children less than 18 years, we are not giving vaccines to them. And COVID vaccine to be deferred for 4 to 8 weeks in persons having active symptoms of COVID-19 infection. So if you have developed COVID-19 infection, you can still get the COVID-19 vaccine after 4 to 8 weeks of the COVID positive status. And COVID-19 patients who have been given anti-COVID-19 monoclonal antibodies or convalescent plasma, they should also wait for 4 weeks. Acutely unwell and hospitalized patients can also get the vaccine after 4 to 8 weeks of their acute illness. And even if you have got the first dose and you have now got the COVID natural infection of COVID-19, you can still get the second dose of vaccine after 4 to 8 weeks of your COVID-19 positive status. So you should administer with caution among the individuals with clotting factor deficiency, coagulopathy, and platelet disorder, but still you can give vaccines to them as well. After vaccination, keep wearing masks, maintain physical distancing, follow hand hygiene, eat healthy and balanced diet, no restrictions related to diet, take tablet paracetamol if febrile or myalgic, avoid alcohol consumption because it may interfere with your immune response. So this is the platform, CoWIN portal. You have to register on this portal to get yourself vaccinated, especially those between 18 to 45 years. Online registration is must. So no spot registration is allowed for individuals between 18 to 45 years to get the vaccine. So this is the status of vaccine state-wise. It is being done in all the states, and we have about 55,000 centers. So to reduce the basic reproductive number from 2 to 3 to 1 to less than 1, and now with reproductive number is about 5 to 6 in this second wave, which means that one person can affect about 5 to 6 another persons. We need to at least give vaccine to 65 to 70% of population, 65 to 70% coverage we require. That means we need to have at least 65 to 70 crore people immunized in India. Currently, we have given vaccines to about 15 crore individuals in India to change the pandemic status. So let's all get vaccinated. Please get your shot today if you have not taken till now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Madhu, for the detailed talk on all different kinds of vaccines. Because I think people had a lot of confusion about what vaccine to take and which one is better. You've cleared all doubts. All vaccines are good, provided one takes them. So the carry home message is that vaccination for everybody is a must. Everybody should get vaccinated. So thank you. And now we'll take the question answers from all the audience. Kiranjit, you have a list of the questions?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So you can start asking the questions from the panelists.
Ma'am, my first question is for Dr. Vikas Suri. Sir, is this disease more severe in smokers and tobacco users like pan and gutka, etc.?
Ma'am, we had done a study in PGI in which we had studied in the first wave 100 people of addictions. So people who had alcohol consumption more than the recommended ones and who were heavy smokers, we did not find a difference in the severity of the disease, but we found a difference in the time to negativity. That people who have had significant addictions, the time to positivity, the time to negativity was longer. But that was in the first phase when we were testing as per the testing strategies of Government of India at day 14, and we were discharging the patients only if once they were negative. There are 2 or 3 studies which have shown some correlation with again to time to negativity, but there is, to the best of knowledge, no significant study which has shown that the smokers are more prone if they are patients have a chest compromise, but patients of COPD definitely are at a higher risk.
Okay, thank you, sir. Sir, another question is that India is presently in which phase of transmission, and for how many days isolation is suggested for a positive patient?
It's difficult to say. The answer in 2020 would have been different, and answer in 2021 seems to be more different. I think so Professor Madhu, as part of the epidemiology team in the department or the community medicine, would be in a better position to answer. But yes, in our hospital, we have our guidelines for the isolation have changed multiple times. At this moment, if we have a contact, a healthcare worker who has a contact or who is positive, so we say that you remain isolated for 10 days. But as per the government guidance, still you have to be isolated for 17 days as per the Government of India guidance.
That has changed now. I think yesterday only Dr. Lakshmi was telling. Now it is 10 days only. Yeah.
That is only in PGI, but not in as per the Government of India.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Ma'am, next question for Dr. Bharti. Ma'am, is there any relation with vaccine administration? This question is for Dr. Madhu, ma'am. Ma'am, is there any relation with vaccine administration and day of menstruation cycle?
No relation. No relation. So you can get the vaccine even when you are menstruating. There is no relation. Please get yourself vaccinated.
Okay, right, ma'am. And ma'am, one question for Dr. Bharti. Ma'am, should ivermectin to be taken as prophylaxis or treatment to pregnant women with COVID-19?
Not at all. Not at all. It is contraindicated.
Okay.
As per RCOG guidelines, as well as ICMR policy, ivermectin is totally contraindicated. Not Feviflu is also contraindicated because there is no definite proven benefit of all these medications. So not at all for pregnancy as prophylaxis or therapeutic use.
Okay. And ma'am, in lactating women and during pregnancy, instead of doxycycline, what other antibiotics should be advised in case she's a COVID positive patient?
Actually, as such, for COVID positive, if you say as such antibiotics are not recommended who are in the home isolation. They are just recommended for the patient who are very severe disease or whom we suspect there can be a superadded infection. So we are usually giving these patients azithromycin or ceftriaxone. So ceftriaxone can be easily given for these patients, IV injectables.
Okay. And ma'am, if mother is positive but the baby is negative, whether baby should be isolated from mother and breastfeeding should be stopped or not, and what is the advice in vice versa cases?
Baby should not be isolated at all because a lot of literature from CDC, WHO has come. Whenever mother wants, there should be a kind of respiratory as well as hand hygiene should be taken by the mother for the breastfeeding of the baby. Or otherwise, if she is very conscious that she doesn't want to give breastfeed, the other thing is just having a good hand hygiene, cleaning the breast. She can express the milk and give it to the relatives who can just take care of the baby. Because whatever we have done in our policy also in NHE for these 250 to 60 women who have delivered with us, we never allowed them to separate. They all were roomed in. Most of the babies, they have turned out to be negative. Only two babies who have proven positive because they have evidence of vertical transmission by placenta, by vaginal, by amniotic fluid and everything. Otherwise, most of the babies, they turned out to be negative. So far enough literature is there to say that there is not a kind of transmission vertical, and by taking good respiratory hygienes and hand hygienes, you can avoid the infection to the fetus as such.
Right. And ma'am, one last question is that how to counsel a woman who has taken vaccine inadvertently in early pregnancy?
Although we didn't have data regarding Covishield and Covaxin, but whatever the risk is there, we find it is hardly negligible because they have said the risk is there just because it is a virus vector, basically virus vector associated. So adenovirus can have a theoretical risk of vertical transmission to placenta, but this is said to be highly negligible. So she should not be counseled for any kind of medical termination. She has to continue the pregnancy as such because whatever literature is there for other vaccines, that is still safe. So we cannot say that you cannot go ahead with the continuation of pregnancy.
Right. Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Madhu, ma'am, how long is immunity expected to last after vaccination?
So whatever the evidence we have, as per that evidence, it says that it can last up till 8 months to 1 year. So, and if we after 1 year, because this is the time we have since we have the vaccines. So this is the data we have. So currently with this pandemic and with this highly infectious virus and the effectiveness of vaccines against mutant, I think it's best to get the vaccine rather than to think about this. So as we get more data, we'll be more aware about the lasting effect.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. And one more question is there. Can a person who had recently 1 to 2 years undergone bypass surgery and is under blood thinner medication can take the vaccine?
So we have already given vaccines on to the people who are on blood thinners without any serious effects. So yes, I don't think there will be any issue, and if they are stable, they should take the vaccine. Because they're at a higher risk of getting the COVID-19 severe disease.
Okay. Ma'am, Dr. Bharti, ma'am, should the neonate be tested if the mother is positive? And if yes, the testing should be done on which day of life?
There's a protocol to establish whether there is a vertical transmission. So a protocol was there. If there is a vertical transmission, we have to test them within 24 hours of their birth. because after then we are allowing them to roam in, then there can be infection from the mother also. So if you want to establish that there is a kind of vertical transmission, definitely they should be tested within 24 hours. But now the policy has changed over a period of time, because we have enough literature saying there's nothing is there as per the vertical transmission. So we are discharging mothers as well as babies early, within 2 days of their delivery. So they are not tested sometimes if they don't have any kind of problems.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am. And
Kiranjit, there are 2-3 questions which I just can say in a line. So there is no indication for booster currently, and for lactating women, you can consult with the treating physician if she is at a higher risk. So even the Covishield and Covaxin can be considered giving them, although ministry does not recommend that these vaccines to be given to the lactating women. So, any comorbidity, there is no contraindication for vaccine, and because the risk of getting severe disease is higher, so we can offer vaccines to them.
Thank you, ma'am. And with this, we are actually overshooting time and would like to close this session. And I would like to invite Dr. Madhu Gupta to please give a vote of thanks.
So thank you so much. And I, together with Department of Obs and Gynae, Dr. Vanita Suri, she's heading the department, Dr. Kirti Iyengar, National Program Officer, UNFPA, Dr. Bimla from UNFPA, and our team, Dr. Neena Singla, Dr. Kiranjit. We would like to thank Dr. Bharti Joshi for giving this very insightful talk on management of COVID-19 patients among pregnant women, and Dr. Vikas Suri from the Department of Internal Medicine for latest guidelines on the management of COVID-19 patients. And I'm really thankful to all the participants who have been really patient and listened to all the talks throughout. And I could see there were very less dropouts. So with this, we would like to close this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
And this recording will be available on YouTube, and you can share the link with others who could not attend. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Kirti, Dr. Bimla. Thank you, Dr. Vikas, Dr. Bharti, Dr. Neena, Dr. Kiranjit.
Thank you, ma'am.
Goodbye. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Have a very good evening.
Thank you.